Alison Morgan in Llanelli wants to say Happy Valentine's Day to Brian Malcolm. And Claire Ellen from Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire would like to say, I love you to Stuart.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
Valentine's Day, 1989. All around Britain, couples were sending each other tokens of their love.
What we're doing today is playing every record a love song for St. Valentine's Day.
3,000 miles and 3 time zones ahead in Iran. The chargé d'affaires at the British Embassy was entering into the spirit of the day.
We were all opening our St. Valentine's Day cards, and I went back to my house in the compound.
At that moment, Radio Tehran was broadcasting a message of an entirely different sentiment. A fatwa, an Islamic legal opinion, direct from the country's spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Its target was Salman Rushdie, author of the novel The Satanic Verses.
I didn't fully understand what was being said, but there was something about a fatwa, F-A-T-W-A, I think. I called the head of our Middle East department in London and said to him, I think you should look at the tapes. There's something like called a fatwa, and it's going to cause a lot of trouble.
Back in Britain, the BBC's monitoring station just outside London picked up the fatwa and relayed it to its newsrooms.
It came in as a piece of news on a wire service, and somebody said, oh, there's something interesting from Tehran.
I'll be talking to him in a moment, and we've got him up, so we'll do him now.
The Ayatollah's extraordinary attack and his virtual order to Shiite extremists to attack Mr. Rushdie was reported on Tehran radio this morning. And we rang him, and we told him that he'd been sentenced to death. The World at One broke news of it to Salman Rushdie. I asked him whether he was taking the threat to him seriously.
I think I have to take them very seriously indeed.
Will you be looking to the British authorities in any form for any kind of protection as a result of this?
I think
threat?
I must. I think honestly, I've just heard the news, and obviously that is something I may well have to think about.
My room was at the top of my house, and I went down the stairs several at a time and locked the front door and shut the shutters, and thought to myself, in a very strange way, detached way, which I suppose is only accounted for by shock, that I wondered how many days or hours I had left to live.
Within hours, Rushdie would disappear into a world of safe houses and secret locations, accompanied everywhere by round-the-clock special protection, a way of life he would endure for nearly 10 years. What was it about this novel that pushed Rushdie's life to the edge and created an international crisis, the like of which has never been seen before or since? This is the extraordinary story of the Satanic Verses affair. Six months before the fatwa, Salman Rushdie was at the pinnacle of his career. His fourth novel was about to be published. He hoped it would repeat the success of his second, Midnight's Children.
The winner of this year's Booker Prize is Salman Rushdie.
And his third, Shame, also a bestseller. With literary acclaim, wealth, celebrity, and a glamorous American wife, Rushdie seemed to have it all.
He just went to parties, as far as I can see, the whole time. He was sort of out every night, and he's got great, social enthusiasm. And he really likes girls. And they really like him too, actually.
But Rushdie's novels had also earned him enemies. His caricature of the Indian Premier, Mrs. Gandhi, in Midnight's Children, led to her taking out a libel suit against him. Pakistan's President Zia-ul-Haq was so offended by the portrayal of himself in shame, he banned the book.
We thought of him as one of the few writers who was actually what we would now call a public intellectual.
It's very nice when novels are dangerous. It seems to me that art happens at the edge.
He was extremely good on platform. He was always doing battle against racism and for minorities, as well as somebody who produced these extraordinary books.
Rushdie's next novel, The Satanic Verses, would be his most ambitious to date. This highly complex exploration of migration and the loss of faith spans 547 pages. It had taken him 5 years to write. Viking Penguin Books paid a record $850,000 for the rights. The main plot centers on the adventures of two Indian actors, Gibreel and Saladin, who fall to earth in Britain when their plane explodes. Miraculously, they survive. But Gibreel begins to fantasize that he's an angel, while Saladin takes on the physical characteristics of the devil.
For me, it was a book about this extraordinary place that London was, in this moment when it was clear that it was a multicultural city, where people who landed here as if they had fallen from a great height into this strange environment had a pretty rough time.
In the novel, Rushdie takes a swipe at the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, calling her Mrs. Torture, and the police, who beat up Saladin in the back of a police van.
When they pulled his pajamas down in the windowless police van, and he saw the thick, tightly curled dark hair covering his thighs, Saladin Chamcha broke down for the second time that night. This time, however, he began to giggle hysterically, infected perhaps by the continuing hilarity of his captors. The 3 immigration officers were in particularly high spirits, and it was one of these who had debagged Saladin with a merry cry of "Opening time, Packy, let's see what you're made of."
But as with all his novels, Rushdie was venturing into new and controversial territory. This time, the religious mythology of Islam. Rushdie was born into a liberal Muslim family in Bombay in 1947.
I ceased to be formally religious at quite an early age. I mean, it's a teenager, I suppose, and I've never changed. I've never been born again, so to speak. But I've always remained. There's always been this kind of this nagging space where the religion used to be.
I think the extent of Salman's religious upbringing would have been once a year he was taken to the mosque on Eid, I suppose in quotes to pray, but when he asked what he should do, and he was told that when they go down, you go down, when they get up, you get up.
Nevertheless, Rushdie found himself drawn to a disputed episode in the birth of Islam, known as the Satanic Verses. Rushdie came across the story while he was studying Islamic history at Cambridge University.
I've discovered that in some, but not all, of the traditions of the Prophet, there exists this strange story, which is a kind of story of temptation, in which Muhammad was offered some kind of a deal.
In the early days of Islam, Prophet Muhammad had trouble winning over converts to his new religion with its single God. According to the story, Muhammad was tricked by the devil into a compromise. He told the people of Mecca that they could also worship their favorite pagan goddesses. But when the angel Gabriel later revealed Satan's evil deed, the so-called Satanic Verses were removed from the Quran. Many Muslims don't believe the incident ever took place. The Satanic Verses form the subplot of the novel. Rushdie creates a fictional and flawed prophet who he calls Mahound, the derogatory term the early Crusaders gave to Muhammad. It means devil or false prophet. The city of Mecca becomes Jahiliyyah, the name given to the pagan time of ignorance before Islam.
They're visionary sequences. They're not intended to have the validity of a kind of historical event because they happen in somebody's dream. So obviously in a dream things change, names change, places change shape, nothing is as it really is in life. And I wanted those sequences to have that kind of visionary quality. And so quite deliberately did not call the city Makkah. I did not call Muhammad Muhammad because I didn't want it to be a picture of him, but a kind of dream of him.
It's not the first time a writer had questioned the divine nature of Islam, but none had been so bold as to use the contentious satanic verses as the basis for a novel. Rushdie sent proof copies to his friends and family to read.
I found it impossible to not be afraid because the tradition, the orthodoxy, and the fear of anybody pushing open those doors, I understood that it would be contentious, that he would make some people cross.
I knew when I read the book that Salman was completely aware of stirring a controversy within Islam. It was mischief, and it was deliberate, magic, realistic mischief. What I said to Salman is, you'll be shuffling from TV studio to TV studio defending your views against the mullahs. And he said, ha, bring it on.
Events were about to move to Rushdie's birthplace, India. In the summer of 1988, Rushdie also sent a copy of the book to a friend in Delhi, the writer Madhu Jain.
What was a bit strange was he was worried about how this book would be received in the United States. He was thinking of what one said, black Muslims at that time. He was worried about that. And then we told him, look, don't worry about them, worry about the subcontinent. But we said it's going to come from here. And he didn't seem to take it in.
Rushdie's publisher, Viking Penguin, had just set up a subsidiary in Delhi. The manuscript was sent to its distinguished editorial advisor, the writer Khushwant Singh, to consider publication for the massive Indian market.
I went through the manuscript and advised against it. And for good reasons. I found two references in the novel which I thought would not be acceptable to the Muslims. One was about the Quran, and the other one was about the Prophet's wives.
In one of the passages, Rushdie's deranged character, Gibril, dreams about a brothel called the Curtain. The Arabic translation is the hijab, the traditional Muslim head covering for women. The brothel's 12 prostitutes take on the names and the personalities of the Prophet's wives.
When the news got around Jahilia that the whores of the Curtain had each assumed the identity of one of Mahoun's wives, the clandestine excitement of the city's males was intense. The men of Jahilia flocked to the Curtain, which experienced a 300% increase in business.
I'm an agnostic. I don't have any feelings about God or religion of any kind, but with no excuse whatsoever to have a brothel with the women named after the Prophet's wives. So that was sheer bad taste.
Islam is based on the belief that the Quran is the direct word of God, revealed through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. In Rushdie's novel, one of his characters, Salman, suspects that the Prophet Mahound is making up the revelations to advance his own cause.
Salman began to notice how useful and well-timed the angel's revelations tended to be, so that when the faithful were disputing Mahound's views on any subject, from the possibility of space travel to the permanence of hell, the angel would turn up with an answer. And he always supported Mahound.
I suggested that unless they were taken out, I don't think there should be an Indian edition. Otherwise, there'd be no Penguin India left. I know the reactions of my Muslim brethren better than the Muslim-born Salman Rushdie. There's a well-known adage, you say anything you like about God, but beware of what you say about Prophet Muhammad.
Unknown to Rushdie, Penguin backed down and abandoned plans for an Indian version. However, they were still planning to export the British version to the Indian market. In mid-September, Rushdie gave interviews to the Indian press.
I had this sort of inside information and I put it to Rushdie and I asked him if he knew that Penguin India was actually not going to publish his book and that it could be controversial. And he was very surprised. He didn't know about it. And he said, I haven't heard about this. And it's a strange view of the world to think that a book can cause riots. I was actually a little surprised because, you know, coming from India as I did, I knew that the slightest thing causes a riot in India. So I asked him again, I said, but isn't the situation in India quite delicate? And he says, no. He spoke about why he'd written the book. I mean, he said, I believe that, you know, we need to discuss everything. Nobody is above discussion and criticism, and whether it's the Prophet or whether it's Islam or religion.
Shrabani Basu's article was leapt on by a leading Indian Muslim campaigner.
The moment I read it, I felt it was hot potatoes.
He immediately lobbied government ministers and demanded the book be banned.
I was concerned with this troublesome anticipation that this book is a bundle of troubles. They're going to set the country on fire. It's going to spill blood. And the sufferers will be ourselves. Therefore, I went and begged the government, please, stop it.
Days later, the Satanic Verses was published in Britain to mixed reviews. Back in India, heated debates were taking place in Parliament. With elections looming the following year, the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi could not afford to alienate India's 100 million Muslims. The Indian government caved in and banned the book. Within weeks, India's action was followed by 10 other countries in Africa and Asia.
I thought India brought some kind of shame upon itself by doing that. For Salman, it was not a good thing to happen because it kind of put it center stage on an international. It made other people take notice where they may not have. And I think it did start something.
Before long, Muslim activists in India were warning their friends in Britain about the book. First to take action was the Islamic Foundation in Leicester. They photocopied the offending passages and sent copies to Islamic organizations, embassies and mosques throughout Britain.
You'll find vast majority of Muslims may never have read the book. We got to know of the book through news reports, through Muslim publications, and through excitable discussions after prayers at the mosque.
At that time, I did not read the book, but I read those paragraphs which were highlighted for me. But because some of my colleagues read it, and their response was that it is not a readable piece of material. It is insulting, it is abusive.
I was very angry that someone brought up in an Indian Muslim family who must have known just how deep the love of the Prophet goes in Islamic families, how they're taught from a very young age to love the Prophet more than their own selves, their own families. This was not a work of simple imagination. It seemed to me to be a targeted attempt to vilify and cause outrage.
One Muslim leader who did read the book was a Harley Street dentist, Hesham El-Asawi.
I worked on it
Every spare time that I had, about 6 hours a day. It took me a record 3 weeks to finish, hard going. It was hard going. I actually suggested to my friends that there should be a prize for people who finish reading the Satanic verses.
But Isawi was troubled by what he read. He wrote to Penguin and urged them to take action.
I said, put a health warning on the book to say that this is a novel and has nothing to do with the historical events. That's all I asked for, because I thought this would have got us out of trouble.
Isawi's prophetic warning went unheeded. A crisis meeting of Muslim groups decided to set up an action committee to press Penguin to withdraw and pulp the book and get the novel banned under Britain's blasphemy laws.
We even wrote a letter to the Prime Minister at that time, even to the Queen. We thought that we was doing everything within our power to show our hurt to the people at large. And we felt that nobody was willing to listen to us.
You have to go back 20 years to realize that how Muslims were treated, like dirt. Discrimination was going on, not only on the place of work, but in schools. People don't realize the powerlessness and helplessness the Muslim community felt at that time.
British laws of blasphemy, as Muslims soon discovered, only apply to Christianity, and even then are hardly ever used. The Prime Minister turned their request down flat. The same day, the Satanic Verses scooped the Whitbread Literary Prize.
In effect, what we were being told as a minority is, like it or lump it, you've got to take the abuse, you've got to take the vilification, you've got to take the disrespect. It's not a nice message at the best of times, so we didn't take it very well. Muslims didn't take it very well. And Rushdie became, quite understandably, a hate figure amongst the Muslim community.
Frustrated by what they saw as the government's lack of response, the Muslim community in the northern town of Bradford decided to raise the stakes. They would burn the book. An earlier protest in Bolton was ignored by the press. 1,000 protesters gathered in the centre of Bradford, and this time the press were on hand.
We're told to get a picture, and if you got it back in time, could get it in that day's paper, which is quite something for a Saturday. So I remember running across. When turning the corner, there was all this crowd, and I was quite surprised. I thought, crikey, what's going on? Anyway, I saw this little group up here, and they had a book tied to some sort of a stick, and they're just, not doing anything, quite honestly.
The main protest organiser was Liaquat Hussain.
It was a very windy day, and we tried to set fire on it, and the wind kept, undermining us.
And I was watching for the deadline and things like that. And I said, are you going to set fire to the book? I said, well, yes, not sure they said 2 o'clock. I come to think of it. Oh, I said, that's no good for me at all. I said, can you do it now? Then we can get it in the paper.
And someone had thoughtfully brought some paraffin, and we had to put some paraffin on the book to actually, to light it, because books are very difficult to burn when they are bound.
And so they obliged me, poured it on, and then set fire to it. Happy event for me to do that, and I got the picture and ran back.
It burned beautifully, I remember it burning. It was a scene, many people still remember, I remember it. fantastic scene, you know.
Britain finally woke up to a crisis that had been simmering for months.
At that point, I thought, wow, this is the most serious multicultural episode that Britain has ever faced.
I thought religion was dead and gone a long time ago. It personally took me by surprise that religion was rearing its ugly head at all.
I personally was utterly horrified because my only notion of book burning was Nazis. We all knew, I think, Heine's comment about first you burn the book, then you burn the man. It was a horrific symbolic event.
We was amazed to see that even the legitimate herd which we was presenting, the media then took it totally opposite, as if that we have done something totally wrong. Why have we burnt the book? So instead of getting a support, we was condemned.
The same day, the campaign chalked up its first success. After complaints to its store in Bradford, the high street bookseller W.H. Smith decided to take the book off its shelves.
We put on notice by the police that they consider this to be a serious issue. We should address it. And I was extremely concerned at the time about the security of our staff, our customers, and we're running a commercial organisation, so if we actually find something that actually decides that people should not shop in our shops, then we ought to take it very seriously, and we did.
As his friends predicted months earlier, Rushdie was forced onto the defensive.
In a sense, is it a surprise that you've had the depth of reaction from the Muslim community?
Certainly. I mean, the scale of it is a surprise to me, and also is a great distress to me. I think what's true about the book is that it does break a number of taboos, which, in my view, are very important to break. The first is the idea that Muhammad's life cannot be discussed as if he was a human being. Muhammad himself always insisted not to have divine status. And yet, nowadays, we're talk about him as if he was kind of perfect being. There are other taboos. There's taboos about the discussion of Islam as it developed as a historical phenomenon. So yes, I think it's very important if the culture of a religion is to have an intellectual life, that such things should be discussed. And of course, the people who wish to control thought, the thought police, that's who's responsible for this action, don't wish one to do that.
Rushdie was now receiving death threats, and Penguin was targeted by bomb threats and hate mail. Muslim groups organised a massive rally in London, followed by a week-long vigil outside Penguin's offices.
I have no doubt that the Satanic Verses controversy acted as a catalyst, a galvanising factor to enable the emergence of a more confident British Muslim identity. Prior to that, we had been categorised along ethnic terms, whether we're Indian background, or Pakistani, or Iranian, or North African. But these protests against the book brought us all together and helped forge the idea of a common faith identity.
It's as though all the anger, all the fury of the years of neglect and racism and hatred had suddenly organised itself around Islam, as though being an immigrant wasn't a sufficient identity to create some sort of united movement. When they did organise, it was to attack one of their own about a book that was about the intricacies, partly, of their own religion, Islam.
I was beginning to get more worried for his personal safety. I was thinking, you're not safe with what's happening. It's coming a little close to home. It's now, you know, are you safe walking the streets, and be sure you lock up at night. And it did begin to feel that he was an easy target.
But Salman, if I can ask you first of all...
Rushdie continued to press his case in media interviews. In one, he came face to face with one of his critics.
Mr. Assawi is trying here to pose as the acceptable face of this campaign, you know, but I think it's very important to say that this is a mask. The point about the burning of a book, and I thank you very much for buying it before burning it, you know, that really isn't the point here. You say it didn't break any law. There are laws in a civilized society which are not written in statute books.
I thought he was going to hit me.
The point is that the burning of a book always means the same thing. That's why people are so angry about it.
But this is something you would condemn anyway, isn't it? You would actually condemn.
No, but the fact is that
Mr. Rushdie keeps answering questions that has not been asked.
On the way back from Birmingham, I noticed that he was sitting in the same carriage that I was sitting, and I went to him and I said, "Well, Rushdie, look, I would advise you to put a little health warning in the book to say this is a novel." And he shouted at me, and he said, "If you don't get out of here, I'll call the guards." And he felt threatened. And so I said, "Okay, well, if you change your mind, you know where to get me."
As dissent over the book continued to grow in Britain, back in Asia, more protests got underway, with fatal consequences. In Pakistan, 5 demonstrators were killed and about 100 were injured when a crowd of 10,000 marched on the American Cultural Center in Islamabad. The deaths were brought to the attention of the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. Iran had just emerged from a bloody 7-year war with its neighbor, Iraq. The moderates in the Iranian regime were determined to improve relations with the West and attract foreign investment to help rebuild the war-torn country. Britain was seen as a key step on that road. Diplomatic relations, which had been broken off following the Islamic Revolution in 1979, had been restored 2 months earlier. And the new chargé d'affaires had just taken up its post.
Number one priority was to try to contact Roger Cooper, a British businessman who'd been seized by the Iranians, never charged with any offence, and was languishing in Evin prison, which was a particularly nasty place to have to spend time.
I'd already been in jail nearly 3 years, and I thought this can't go on forever. There were helpful signs from my interrogator. He was getting a bit more friendly, you might say, and saying that they were working towards releasing me.
There had been hopes that better relations between Britain and Iran would aid the release of 2 British hostages, John McCarthy and Terry Waite, who were being held by the pro-Iranian group Hezbollah in the Lebanon.
Everyone was talking very optimistically about their chances of release. We were told that John might be released. You don't allow yourself to get your hopes up too high, but a lot of good things were happening in terms of the relationship between Britain and Iran.
Terry Waite's captors had recently taken him to a new hiding place.
They moved me to very nice quarters, to a private house. And they said, you'll be going home soon. They brought me good food, even wheeled in, for the first time, a video machine and said, you can watch videos if you want, and it doesn't matter, you'll be home soon.
But all that was about to change. A British Muslim leader, the pro-Iranian scholar Khalim Siddiqui, and his deputy had been attending a conference in the Iranian capital, Tehran. As morning broke on the 14th of February, they were waiting at the airport for their flight home.
We saw Dr. Khatami, who was then Minister of Islamic Guidance. And when he saw Dr. Khalim Siddiqui, he went to greet him, and he said, Khalim, can I have a word with you? So they went to a corner and chatted. When he came back, Khalim Siddiqui, I asked, what were you talking? He said he's going to see Khomeini, and he was asking my view about Salman Rushdie. And I told him that, something drastic has to happen.
Dr. Khatami left the airport for his meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini. The Siddiqui's flight was cancelled, so they went back to their hotel in Tehran.
Several hours later, somebody came running. Dr. Khalil, did you hear the radio? I said, no, I don't understand Farsi, of course. He said, well, what happened? He said, Imam has issued a fatwa against Salman Rushdie.
He's passed a death sentence.
Salman Rushdie has been sentenced to death.
Satanic Verses is an insult to Islam, the Ayatollah said, and he, his publishers, and everybody knowingly involved in producing the book were now under sentence of death.
Khomeini's death sentence came as a bolt out of the blue. Never before, in modern times, had a government publicly condemned to death a private citizen of another nation. Rushdie hit back on the lunchtime news. It would be his last TV appearance for some time.
It shows that this is the latest stage in a campaign that began with smears and vilifications and distortions of the book, which has escalated through all sorts of levels of violence. And frankly, I wish I'd written a more critical book. I mean, a religion that claims that is able to behave like this, religious leaders, let's say, who are able to behave like this, and then say that this is a religion which must be above any kind of whisper of criticism. I mean, that doesn't add up. It seems to me that Islamic fundamentalists could do with a little criticism right now.
Nobody was taking the threat lightly. Several Iranian political exiles had been assassinated in Europe in recent years. That afternoon, a hastily arranged meeting at Scotland Yard made an immediate decision to give Rushdie Grade 1 special protection, the highest level of security.
I remember it being a very easy decision to take. Here was somebody living in Britain who had done nothing illegal under British law, subject to threats, which had to be taken very seriously, and the first thing to do was to protect him. So there was no question of sort of hesitation about that.
Rushdie and his wife immediately went into hiding.
I got a call from him saying that he wasn't going to go home, and would I go and get some stuff from the house and bring it to where he was. I went over there, and it was already strange. I mean, the door was opened by a special branch officer, and Salman was there with his then wife, and he was deeply shaken. I mean, profoundly shaken.
Rushdie's 9-year-old son, by his first marriage, had just arrived home from school.
I picked up the phone to the first kind of, scary voice down the other end of the line saying, "We know where you live and we're going to kill you soon." And I said, "Mom, I think it's for you," and gave the phone to her.
In some ways, ironically, I thought, okay, lead up to the fatwa, I'd been really, really scared. And you think now, okay, well, at least something's happened. How silly. I thought, at least something's happened that's given him police protection. He'll be safe now, and it'll get sorted. And then he came and effectively to say goodbye. He was being taken away. We didn't know how far he was being taken, where he was being taken, and that was very scary because we had absolutely no idea on that day when we might see him or how.
All around the country, Muslims were digesting the news of the Ayatollah's fatwa.
My personal view is that perhaps death would be a bit too easy for him to get away with it. But I think his life, his mind is going to be tormented for the rest of his life as to what he has done, unless he asks for his forgiveness to Almighty Allah.
I saw Imam Khomeini. I mean, he became a hero to me overnight. He was a man who did not live like the Gulf rulers. He didn't live in a fancy palace. He lived a very simple, very frugal life. Yet he was the supreme leader of Iran, and here he was, standing up for the honor of the Prophet Muhammad. It endeared him immediately to millions of Muslims the world over, including myself.
The media descended on Bradford, where this view appeared unanimous.
He's a devil, the true devil himself come to life.
How many people do you think feel like that?
We all feel like that, all of us. We are true Muslims, and you are true Christians. You will do the same as we are going to do. If I get the chance, or any one of my colleagues get the chance, we will definitely do what the Ayatollah says.
We think that until he is dead, we won't leave him.
I have not come across anybody who disagreed with the fatwa. I mean, I don't disagree.
In fact, to say that you didn't support the fatwa at the time was almost as if you were betraying the Prophet himself. You were unwilling yourself to be counted. It was almost, if you didn't support the fatwa, there was something wrong with you, that, your faith was lacking.
In reality, many Muslims didn't support the fatwa, but few dared to speak out.
We should not be threatening him with violence, because it's giving us the wrong image, and that is not an image we want.
Because it's up to God what punishment should be given. I don't think anyone can claim that he should be killed or anything like that.
Imam Khomeini was acting totally outside the religion of Islam. There is absolutely no support in the religion itself for Imam Khomeini's fatwa.
But many Muslims now saw the Ayatollah as the great defender of Islam against the West.
The timing is interesting. I mean, if there was a theological point to make and it was purely theological, you would have made it much earlier. You also have to say, why was it this particular book? There were many other insults that have been thrown at Islam which have not received this sort of treatment. And that cannot be understood outside the political maneuverings that were going on in Iran at the time.
The hardliners in the Iranian government had been trying to block the recent rapprochement with Britain.
It's clear that a number of people among the more hardline elements within the regime had decided to draw his attention to the book. It was a way in which Ayatollah Khomeini could keep some of the more hardline elements within the country happy. And it also had the effect, of course, of diverting some of the attention away from domestic difficulties and turning this into a sort of an international incident that the Iranians could focus on.
Yesterday, the Ayatollah Khomeini said Mr. Rushdie and everyone involved in the publication of his book should be murdered. Now, one of the Ayatollah's aides has offered £1 million to anyone who will do it.
The crisis was escalating by the day. British diplomats in Tehran were told that a national day of mourning was underway to mark the deaths caused by the protests.
Yes, the Foreign Minister said there'll be a demonstration, but don't worry about it, it'll be dispersed fairly quickly. How many people did I say? Well, a few hundred, they said. Not a bit of it. We heard this extraordinary noise. It's a wave of sound which starts to build up. It's the sound of 10,000 people marching together, all singing the same songs, in a very aggressive way. And when they arrived at the embassy, there was a lot of stone throwing and various diversions. And BBC came on the line and said, what's going on out there? Are you all right?
It is a very noisy demonstration, and a certain amount of rubbish has been thrown at the embassy, but so far no attempt has been made to break over the embassy walls. There's quite a bit of passion, but I would say that it's not growing at the moment.
The demonstration went on, and eventually I got fed up and rang the Foreign Ministry and said, look, you've had your fun and games, would you please send the demonstrators home? And not long after that they did start to disperse, which demonstrated that they were totally under the control of the government.
Playwrights and authors are among those deeply worried. Today, a group of them handed a petition to Mrs. Thatcher.
I went to number 10 with Harold. They wouldn't let us in. They just sort of opened the door and we shoved a note through the door saying, don't hurt our friend.
We urge you to denounce both the Ayatollah's command and the campaign of intimidation against Rushdie in this country, and to take up the matter with the government of Iran and Muslim leaders and organizations.
Within days, Writers and human rights activists would launch a campaign to get the fatwa lifted and defend the right to free speech.
The feeling was that unless we actually held the line somewhere, unless we made it abundantly clear that though these religious fanatics, wherever they came from, were making a statement about what their beliefs were, we should be equally strong in making a statement about what our beliefs were, i.e. that, you know, freedom of expression is the cornerstone of democracy and had to prevail.
Worried about upsetting the recent diplomatic progress with Iran, the Foreign Office played down the affair.
Plainly, one must be very deeply concerned about events of that kind, but one has to try to maintain a sense of perspective and impress upon the other country the possible harm that can be done by incidents of this kind.
In fact, the Foreign Office was totally taken by surprise.
I'd never heard of Salman Rushdie. I was just about to spend the weekend with a friend in Staffordshire, and I think I got the book sent up there, so that I was able to see it. Well, I went through it, looking to get the flavour. I couldn't begin to tell you what the storyline was, and I read enough of it to wreck the weekend, but be in a position to answer questions about it to some extent. I could see that it offended people, and Muslims are not the only people likely to be offended by it.
February 1989. Special branch officers are with me round the clock. I am not to use my own car anymore. It is locked away. I am driven in armored Jaguars. The windows don't wind down because they're over an inch thick. We stop for petrol, and I go to the toilet, and every head in the gas station turns and stares. We stay at a country hotel. They say things will be sorted out soon, and then I can go home. We go for a drink at a pub, and people come up to me and grasp my arm and say, "Are you all right?" They say to the police, "Look after him." I am very touched.
In London, Iranian diplomats were summoned to the Foreign Office to explain the Ayatollah's action.
I remember them saying, "Why are you making such a fuss about this? This is just one of our apostates, and we have to kill him. I mean, what's the problem?" And that was a problem for us. They were perfectly capable of saying, "Oh, that murderer who came and killed him, we didn't send him." And in what sense did they not send him or send him? They'd created the atmosphere in which that person would have come.
The Iranian representative agreed to a rare television interview to set out his government's position.
The chargé, Mr. Basti, sat down and was very genial, cordial, welcoming, anxious to discuss it, because he was genuinely, I think, very puzzled by our reaction. I suppose I went for him.
Do you understand that we do not regard it as civilized to kill people for their opinions?
Well, you may have different version of defining civilization, defining democracy, for example. You say that in your country, anyone is free to express his opinion.
That is the bedrock
That's
of
very
what
good.
we believe in.
That's very good.
Just as the Quran is the bedrock of what you believe in.
Hold on.
I probably did commit one of the minor crimes of the frontman interviewer. I probably did let my own opinions show.
If you offend against that, the offense to us is very great.
Of course, if that is the logic, so the same right is reserved for any person, a head of state, religious figure, to give his opinion freely, without any intimidation, without any fear from anyone.
But the Ayatollah's opinion is a command.
Well,
his opinion was that Mr. Rushdie should be put to death.
Well, that is an opinion.
He stuck to his view that we'd all got it quite wrong, that the old man in Tehran had simply expressed a view. And of course, it wasn't a command at all, which it's a bit like the "who will rid me of this turbulent priest," isn't it?
The streets of Tehran this morning were filled with crowds taking up the cry for Salman Rushdie's life. their posters gruesomely disfigured, their demands all too obvious.
Then came a sign from Iran, from the moderate President Khamenei, of a possible way out.
He told the crowd that while Mr. Rushdie was a wretched man with no choice but to die, he could admit he made a blunder, apologise, and possibly then be pardoned. Foreign Office sources concede this does offer a glimmer of hope.
The following day, Rushdie duly issued an apology.
I profoundly regret the distress that publication has occasioned to sincere followers of Islam. He goes on to say that in a world of many faiths, it was a reminder that we must all be conscious of the sensibilities of others.
A day later, Ayatollah Khomeini weighed in with his unequivocal response.
Even if Salman Rushdie repents and becomes the most pious man of all time, the Ayatollah said, Muslims should employ everything they've got to send him to hell.
Within days, the European community had withdrawn all its ambassadors from Tehran. Britain called back its diplomats and asked Iranian envoys to leave London, in what they hoped would be a temporary measure. After a few weeks in Tehran, a disappointed Nick Brown, along with his colleagues, was on his way home.
When I arrived, of course, I could not have expected any of this. I was looking forward very much to going back to Iran and having a useful job to do there. And I believe that we could have done a very useful job. Of course, recent events unfortunately prevented that.
An atmosphere of intimidation flourished. In London, the newscaster Peter Sissons turned up for work as usual, only to find himself ushered into a meeting with his editor and a posse of special branch police officers.
They very gravely told me that I was now at risk and a very serious threat had been made against me, and they showed me the telex that ITN had received, which made it quite plain that the fatwa extended to me and that I was to be killed. My reaction was, well, you know, that's a bit over the top, isn't it? You know, I'm just doing my job.
For the next 6 weeks, Sissons would experience at first hand Rushdie's own predicament.
One night we pulled away from ITN, and I always used to look behind to see if anyone was following us. And as we pulled away from ITN to take me home, a black limo followed. And it must have been on my tail for about 5 miles before we got down the Old Kent Road and it turned off. But by God, I was wetting myself during that time, just wondering who on earth is that, because it was never left our rear bumper.
End February 1989. Haven't written for a few days because things have been very tough. It's clear that there will be no quick fix. The TV is full of bloodlust. I'm not at the hotel anymore. I am in this unnameable place. There is weaponry everywhere, and by my side is a panic button that I am to hit if anything worrying happens. It is very, very cold. I can't go home. People have gone there for me and brought out clothes since I left with nothing but what I was wearing. I'm able to make a few phone calls, but I can give nobody the number and must not answer the phone if it rings. We do not know what horror may be coming our way.
Britain was still trying to save its relationship with Iran. The Foreign Secretary, Geoffrey Howe, went onto the BBC World Service to distance the government from the book.
The British government, the British people, had nothing to do with the writing or the publishing of satanic verses. We're not promoting the book. We don't agree with the views it expresses. The book, as I say, is offensive about our government and about our society, and we resent that. We understand why people of the Muslim faith, which we respect, resent what is said about their faith in the book. So all those things surely make plain that there is a huge distance between ourselves and the book.
Well, one didn't want to give him a vote of thanks. we thought the same as many other people. Here is a man who comes from a world of which this is part, and he must have known more than anybody else the likely impact of what he wrote. So one was bound to say he must have realized this was going to happen.
There was nothing he had done to create that situation. People asked time and time again, did he not expect this? I mean, it's been something that's unprecedented. It was a set of circumstances globally that came together, which he didn't have in mind in the 5 years before that he was writing the book. It wasn't a grassroots uprising. It was a political construct, and Salman was a pawn in that game.
In any event, Geoffrey Howe's appeal fell on deaf ears. 5 days later, Iran formally broke off relations with Britain. The prospects for the hostages were bleak.
We realised that that was it, that any hope that we thought we had just gone. And it felt to me like we were in a worse position than we were even at the start, because things were worse between Britain and Iran now than they were right at the beginning.
The guards were talking about it, and some of the really hardline guards were saying, yes, hooray, this man, Rushdie, must be killed, we would love to go and do it ourselves. This obviously was pretty bad news for me.
Well, I must say...
Unknown to Cooper, on the same day as the fatwa, Iran had decided his sentence. The details were later revealed to him by the prison governor.
He said, Cooper, I shouldn't really tell you this, but I think it's good if you know your sentence. And I said, yes, I'm dying to know. It's 3 years now. And he said, it's death plus 10 years of jail. So I said, well, which comes first, Governor? And he said, very good point. You've been a very interesting person for me to talk to. I'll write on your file, keep him for 10 years, and then you hang him.
In Beirut, Terry Waite's captors ended his stint in comfortable quarters.
They came in, and instead of going home, went back into normal hostage accommodation for about another few years, with no explanations, none whatsoever.
2 Muslim clerics who urged restraint in the Salman Rushdie affair have been shot dead inside Belgium's biggest mosque tonight.
The fatwa had claimed its first casualties. The moderate leader of Belgium's Muslims and his deputy were killed after the leader spoke out against the fatwa on television. Rushdie's first months in hiding were marked by renewed threats against his life. He moved house 57 times. He usually didn't stay in one place for more than one night.
Nobody could put up with that kind of stress, that kind of pressure, and being in that position. And I think he became paranoid. And indeed, you would be paranoid if you genuinely knew that Iranians with guns were chasing after you.
There's a lot of people that have to be involved in every procedure that he would do. You know, when I was with him, then that would involve me as well. And 15 people every time you go out, and 4 cars, and some of them bulletproof and armored. It does mean that the places you're living in become kind of like a prison. And that, I think, was very, very hard for him to deal with, and is what would often get him down.
Rushdie's friends rallied round to try and cheer him up, with a series of highly secret dinner parties.
Salman at that first dinner party was in a bad state. He was frightened, he was worried, he was confused, he didn't know who his friends were. I spent enormous sums of money on these dinner parties. I do remember that because it was so also sort of nervy.
It was always a bit dodgy when the special branch were around, whether you were allowed to smoke dope or not. Because it was clearly perfectly normal for everyone to smoke dope during these evenings, as we were all kids of the 60s. When the special branch were around, you know, you're always worried a bit whether, you know, as soon as you sparked out, whether they would arrest you. There was one bloke in the special branch that Salman was rather friendly with. Didn't have a sense of smell at all. So it was all right to smoke dope around him because he didn't notice.
Wherever Rushdie went, his special protection officers were always by his side.
They made you go to the front door. And the police took their positions behind you with their guns out, and you knew that if you opened the door, you would be the first to go.
Someone had come to my place, and we were just having something to eat in the front room. And the police were in the back room, and the cat came too quickly through the cat flap, like, rap, 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 rap. And the police were all pointed their guns at this cat.
But sometimes the police weren't quite so alert.
I remember one night when they all went, sitting on my sofa and realising I'd sat on a gun. And I ran out of the house, waving this gun around, and knocked on the door of the police car and said to the bloke, "Here, mate, I think you've left your shooter behind." And he looked he went white.
Rushdie's supporters and critics were brought face to face in a TV debate.
I was called onto the hypotheticals program, and I thought that, yeah, one mustn't be cowardly about it.
Farouk Dondi, can you see a film being made of the Satanic Verses?
I can see a part of the Satanic Verses being transformed into a rather good film. There is the autobiographical piece, in which Salman talks basically about a character such as himself. And I think that the quality of invention in that section, in that dimension, is really lively and can make a spanking good cinematic story.
Suddenly, Dondi was interrupted by a group of people in the audience.
They started shouting at the other end of the table. I don't know if the camera was active then, but they started saying, "Kill him, kill him." Any reproduction of this book in any form whatsoever will entail death for the perpetrator, such as Mr. Dondi there, sort of. And I thought, crikey, is what I thought.
Make sure it's the right person.
Another participant was the Muslim convert, Yusuf Islam, formerly the singer Cat Stevens. He also supported the death sentence on Rushdie. He was asked if he would give him shelter.
Yes, I'd try to phone the Ayatollah Khomeini and tell him exactly where this man is. Would you go to a demonstration where you knew that an effigy was going to be burnt? I would have hoped that it'd be the real thing, but actually, no, if it's just an effigy, I don't think I'd be that moved to go there.
Well, I am.
Faye Weldon was also taking part in the programme.
Risk, though I do wish the superintendent over there would come over and arrest this man here for inciting on television people to violence, implicitly and otherwise. It seems extraordinary.
He looked confused because it was a television programme, and yet you could see that he'd done something terrible. And how dare he? And why was the police not protecting the people and us?
Thank you all.
As soon as the program finished, the researcher came up to me and said, "Would you like to change your room? Or would you like to go to another hotel?" And I said, "No, absolutely not, you know. I'm not scared of these guys." But I didn't stay for dinner at the hotel. I rushed out and ate somewhere else. And came back, stole into my room, and then barricaded it with tables and chairs so that at least I'd have a warning if somebody broke into the room at night. But I didn't want to show that I was afraid of them.
Ironically, the fatwa had turned the novel into a bestseller. But many Muslims still wanted it withdrawn from circulation. 70,000 of them gathered in London in a last-ditch attempt to get the book banned and the blasphemy laws changed.
It was almost a last throw of the dice, you know. Every effort was put in to demonstrate with huge numbers and convey our feelings in as lawful a manner as we could. There was a real carnival atmosphere almost.
But the mood turned ugly when a group of radical young Muslims tried to wrest control of the march.
It was sick. And also, I mean, you have to remember that he was aware that his young son might see this, to see effigies of his father burnt.
I saw that, and that's pretty shocking, and it drives it home pretty hard. the whole thing up in flames. That's pretty hard to get out of your mind. That certainly has always stuck with me.
When the march reached Westminster, fierce battles broke out between Muslim youths and the police.
It gave the lie to a lot of the stuff he wrote, sympathizing with the Muslims and British racism and anti-Thatcherism and anti-conservatism. The people who were victims in his book had become his oppressors, and the people who were vilified in his books had become his saviors. But he couldn't see the irony of that, you know. He wanted to persist in being the champion of the Muslim immigrants from Mirpur, who were the ones who wanted to kill him.
It was almost a high point of the whole Satanic Verses controversy. We quickly realized that, you know, this book was not going to be pulped. The British government had no intention of extending the blasphemy law. You know, the Satanic Verses was here to stay.
Iran is in mourning for its political and spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, who died last night.
Seldom, if ever, can the world have witnessed such a display of mass grief. Sweeping aside the guards, the mourners took possession of the body of the man they called their father.
Because Ayatollah Khomeini died, nobody had the courage or the political authority or the means, in a way, the theological means, to basically challenge this fatwa. The Ayatollah Khomeini took it with him to his grave, effectively.
The fatwa was here to stay. The outlook for Rushdie was bleak. To make matters worse, by the summer of '89, the tide of public opinion and some writers were turning against him.
He'd always been a controversial figure, and not always somebody who was totally liked by everyone. And after the initial moment of surprise at the book burnings and then the fatwa, all those, if you like, old problems also resurfaced. And people who either didn't like his work or didn't like him for one reason or another decided that, you know, we'd supported him long enough.
There was an enormous amount of racism around this, that he was an Indian, stroke, Pakistani Muslim. He was not born in Britain. And what right did he have to have so much money spent on him?
Anti-terrorist detectives are still investigating yesterday's explosion in a London hotel, which killed a man who'd been working with a bomb. A previously unknown group in Beirut named the dead man and said he was preparing an attack on the author Salman Rushdie.
Just weeks after a failed attempt against his life, Rushdie announced the breakup of his marriage to his American wife, Marianne Wiggins. She blamed the pressure of living under the fatwa. In September 1990, more than 18 months after the fatwa, diplomatic relations between Iran and Britain were partially and quietly restored. Rushdie was still in deep hiding, and he'd had no direct contact with the government.
In a year and a half, nobody in the Foreign Office had made a phone call, never mind a meeting. You know, you're taken into police protection. It's something that's been on the front page of every newspaper of every country in the world. Everyone imagines that he's having conversations with the government, somebody's talking to him about this. Just even in terms of saying a bit of support, a bit of, you know, hang in there where, you know, the time will come. Just a courtesy call. My goodness, you'd get a courtesy call. Nothing. Such deliberate silence. If that doesn't convey deep hostility, what does?
They thought he was a nuisance, possibly somewhat bumptious, certainly expensive, an inconvenience,
Isolated and feeling abandoned, Rushdie was desperate to find a way out. He gave his first TV interview since the crisis broke.
Well, it's difficult. It's quite difficult to talk on television about pain, you know. I mean, but because it sounds awful most of the time, but it is, I mean, it has been. There's one way of answering the question, which is to say, you know, I'm fine. And most of the time that's what I say even to myself, because it's, you know, that's useful. But actually it's been, you know, it's been hell. And there are great losses in it. I mean, for example, a thing that has always been of, you know, central importance in my writing is the city of Bombay. And, you know, God knows when I'll ever be able to go there again.
Watching the programme was the moderate Muslim leader Hesham el-Asawi.
I thought, what's this? I mean, this man claims to be an atheist. And now he's saying, God knows when will I walk the streets of Bombay again? What's an atheist man talking about God for? So I thought, maybe...
You didn't think it was just a figure of speech?
I didn't think it was a figure of speech. I thought that he was genuinely saying that. It sounded genuine to me.
Asawi called the programme and passed on his details. The following day, Rushdie called him back.
And he would phone me almost every night for a pretty long time. I calculate about something like 60 hours of phone calls. Must have cost him a lot.
Rushdie asked Asawi to meet him, but organising a meeting with a marked man was no easy matter.
Special branch was involved in this, and they came and collected me from my home, and they nearly killed me through their procedures. They first took me to Primrose Hill. It was a cold day, and I thought I was going in a car, so I was lightly dressed. I didn't realize that I was going to be left in the cold, sitting on a bench for about 45 minutes until another car comes and picks us up from the other side, went to another park, and the same thing happened again.
After a few hours, the police and their charge reached their final destination, a book warehouse where Rushdie was waiting inside.
He was quoting various Muslim scholars and so on. And then I said to him, but listen, you really are arguing with these people, but you're not one of them. You're not on the same plane because you don't have anything in common. You're not a Muslim. He said, yes, I am. I said, what? You are a Muslim? He said, yes, I am. And he said it in such what appeared to me to be extremely sincere voice.
Asawi devised a plan to help Rushdie to convert to Islam. He secured the backing of President Mubarak of Egypt and 6 prominent Muslim clerics. The clerics were invited to a meeting with Rushdie at the high-security police station, Paddington Green, on Christmas Eve, 1990.
I recall one of the imams asking him if he is putting up a show in order to save his own skin. And Rushdie vehemently denied that he was. And he said, how could I? I would be losing credibility straight away with everyone.
As a gesture of goodwill, Rushdie agreed to cancel the paperback, and the clerics accepted his conversion. Asawi arranged a press conference that same afternoon to announce the news.
Materialism. Hello?
Hello, Salman.
Yes, hello. Well, we just started. We are on time. Good. Well, this is Rushdie now on the phone.
I'd wish to say that this is the community which is closest to my heart, and for me to come closer to it is, for me, a great source of joy. And I was happy to see that that joy seemed to be reciprocated.
But Rushdie had told none of his friends or family about his plans.
I got a phone call, and it was a press person who said, so I see that Mr. Rushdie's reconverted to Islam. And I said, what? That's nonsense, you know. Put the phone down, called up Salman, and he said, very, very sort of shamefacedly, yes. He said, well, yes, I have.
I don't think any of us really believed it. I think everyone thought, oh, we're just going to try that now to get out of it.
But you thought he was sincere at the time?
No, I didn't think he was sincere about it. I didn't think sincerity was important at all. Why would you want to be sincere? You know, you just do anything in order to get out of this terrible situation. You just say what you need to say and hope that these bearded ones will bugger off.
And you have now effectively become a Muslim.
What I have said is that in all my writing, I have moved closer and closer to an engagement with religious faith. And I have no quarrel with the central tenets of Islam, which is the oneness of God and the validity of the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad.
So you're a believer?
I am able to accept the central principle of Islam. I mean, as I've been saying, I'm by no means a perfect believer. I still have great respect for and admire the secular humanist tradition in which I was brought up. But about the central plank of Islam, the thing that you have to say to be a Muslim, with that I have no dissent.
So that effectively you are a Muslim?
So that effectively, yes, I would now be prepared to say that.
I remember him coming round to the house and me saying to him, do you want a moment to go and pray? And I don't think he found that funny at all. I don't blame him, actually.
This was not the Salman that we knew speaking. It was a person under great difficulty, a person in a kind of breakdown.
Rushdie's conversion was dismissed by Iran's new religious leader, who immediately renewed the fatwa.
Express your point of view on Sunrise Radio.
Right, on the phone to me is Mr. Salman Rushdie, the author of the Islamic verses.
From his hiding place, Rushdie appealed directly to Muslim listeners on the Asian radio station Sunrise.
To say that a man is driven mad by his loss of faith and is destroyed by it doesn't seem to me to be an attack on the faith. It seems to me, quite the contrary, to be a moral fable.
If you really expect any Muslim to believe your conversion to Islam, then you have to do all that is in your power to obliterate the book and not carry on to defend it as a text that was misunderstood. Frankly, we just don't buy it.
No, I'm not.
Rushdie had failed to convince his critics and divided his supporters.
It was more than irritating, it was devastating. I mean, apart from anything else, I mean, I, looked incredibly stupid. I didn't really know what was going on. And, having to defend him as well.
Rushdie's sister had been away when the news broke.
The first thing, of course, I did was ring him to say, what the hell is this news? Is it a lie? And he said, no. So I said, have you gone mad? What are you doing this for?
New Year's Day, 1991. Ever since I made my compromise with the Muslim scholars on Christmas Eve, I've been feeling sick. Sick at heart and in my stomach. This isn't me. It isn't me. I speak to my sister. She says, what have you done? Have you gone mad? One of the mullahs I met with is on TV vilifying homosexuals. One of the scholars I met with has written an article saying it's okay to slap your wife if she is disobedient. What have I done, indeed? I repeat my reasons over and over. I wanted ordinary Muslims to know I wasn't their enemy. I wanted to argue the need for a better, more open, less repressive Muslim society, and thought I could do it better from inside the room. It all sounds like nonsense. It sounds like self-justification. This is the worst moment of my life.
Sometime later, Rushdie announced his flirtation with Islam was over.
The Japanese translator of Salman Rushdie's novel The Satanic Verses has been stabbed to death. The body of Professor Hitoshi Igarashi was found at his university near Tokyo.
The translator's murder followed a frenzied assault on the Japanese publisher and the near-fatal stabbing of the Italian translator of the novel. For his own safety and for the sake of the British hostages, Rushdie was advised by the government to make less noise. But the hostage issue would soon be resolved. In March, Roger Cooper had been unexpectedly released. Then in August, John McCarthy was freed. 3 months later, the last remaining British hostage, Terry Waite, finally arrived home.
I can't say that I, would hold him responsible in any way for my being kept. He didn't kidnap me, and I do actually myself believe that people should be free within sort of reasonable bounds to write what they wish. But clearly, this was one of those events, as they say, where the unforeseen consequences of a certain action actually did impinge on me.
The hostages' horrific ordeal was over. But there was no end in sight for the man living in fear for his life on British soil.
The government increasingly allowed it to be understood that they felt that some accommodation should be reached. By accommodation, clearly what is meant was compromise. So it became gradually clear that they would really wish the whole thing to go away. And that was what prompted the second major phase of the campaign, which was to take it international.
Ladies and gentlemen, Salman Rushdie.
With the ever-present security by his side, Rushdie would frequently emerge from hiding to press his case in the centres of power. But the high-profile trips sparked renewed threats on his life, and there were other attacks.
A Norwegian publisher whose company translated Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses, has been shot and seriously wounded.
William Nygaard narrowly survived the assassination attempt. But in another act of terrorism linked to the book, 37 people died in an arson attack on a hotel in Turkey.
Iran has made it clear that the death sentence imposed on Salman Rushdie over his novel The Satanic Verses will not be lifted.
Rushdie was now meeting privately with Foreign Office officials to discuss his case.
There is a moment here when we're trying to galvanize Europe into action, and there's vast sympathy out there, where they say, why is your government being so silent? Why is it one never hears a British minister speak up on this issue? Why is it the British government keeps its mouth shut when you're asking us to make a noise?
Well, let me try and answer that. I mean, anybody who has been dealing at all closely with the subject of relations between the European community and Iran knows that the British have actually stood in the way of what quite a lot of other people wanted, which was an improvement, what we call a contractual relationship, which means an agreement between Brussels and Tehran. So I can give you a categorical assurance that actually the British have stood at times alone, in fact, against
I know
this.
you said that to me before.
Well, I've had to repeat that 2 or 3 times since we've been discussing it recently in Brussels.
The feeling was that the government had played it low-key up till then, but this didn't seem to be working. There wasn't any decrease in the level of threats coming from Tehran, and so the decision was taken to up the ante.
After 4 years in hiding, Rushdie had his first official meeting with a government minister.
Hello. Well, I just think I should say that was a very, very positive meeting. I think it was symbolically very important to be at the Foreign Office at last. And we were told by the government that they had decided to make a very substantial change of policy away from a softly approach and in favor of a much higher profile position on this issue.
That meeting was quickly followed by a visit to number 10 for his first talks with the Prime Minister, John Major. Within months, the Foreign Office official Michael Burton went to Tehran to hold the first high-level talks with the Iranians on the affair.
What they said was that they would not send any commandos, as they put it, to target Salman Rushdie. As regards the fatwa, for technical reasons it could not be lifted because it was a lawfully imposed interpretation. So what I was saying was, that's good, but it's not enough.
It would take another 4 years of campaigning and a change of government both in London and Tehran before the deadlock would be broken.
Voters in Iran have elected a relatively moderate cleric as the country's new president. In a surprise result, Mohammad Khatami overcame the hardliners who've controlled Iran since the revolution in
It gave a new impetus and a new momentum to those within the regime who wanted to find a way out. And it also gave more of a momentum to people, obviously, in Europe and in Britain. But those who were, quote, we would describe them as moderates, had the upper hand, and therefore they ran with it, and there was a political will.
One day I came home and my telephone answering machine was literally buzzing. And so I sort of picked up the messages, and almost before I could do that, the phone rang again. It was a newspaper reporter from one of the press agencies, sort of saying that they'd understood that the fatwa had been repealed. And I said, what? What are you talking about? And they said, yes, it happened in New York, just 20 minutes ago, or whatever it was. So I called Salman, of course, and he knew nothing about it.
After months of secret negotiations between British and Iranian officials at the United Nations, a deal had finally been sealed on the fatwa. Francis de Souza and Rushdie were summoned to the Foreign Office the following morning to watch a live broadcast from New York.
The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran has no intention, nor is it going to take any action whatsoever to threaten the life of the author of the Satanic Verses or anybody associated with his work.
I almost couldn't hear the words, because I was so sort of nervous. And also trying to select in my mind those bits of it that would really make me believe that it was for real. Salman, as usual, listened very, very carefully, and at one point we turned and just absolutely hugged each other, and I have to say I probably very nearly burst into tears, but I didn't.
Well, looks like it's over. Looks like it's over.
There are some hardliners who say that the Iranian government doesn't have the power to lift that fatwa.
Well, all I can say is that it seems that this has been done in Iran with consensus. There doesn't seem to be any opposition to it in Iran. There's one or two self-styled hardliners in England belonging to tin pot organizations who are saying this and that, but they're completely unimportant. The fact is that after 10 years, an extraordinary thing has been achieved.
People may say, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter? What was it all about, for heaven's sake? Salman Rushdie, who... Why it matters is because freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, a free press, an independent and free press, is the way in which you hold a government to account. It's the way in which you allow ideas to flourish. It's the way in which you attempt to resolve major problems around the table rather than through violence. And it is the cornerstone of democracy. It's worth fighting for.
After 9 years, 7 months and 10 days of living in the shadows, Rushdie took his first tentative steps into freedom.
I remember feeling a little cynical about what this might mean in real terms. But nevertheless, the photo opportunity of him walking free down the road was quite nice to see. So it's certainly, I did feel something had shifted on that day, although it wasn't, hooray, it's all over.
In the case of the Satanic Verses, it was the first manifestation of the international reach of radical Islam and its desire to pursue a kind of international agenda, in that case aimed at one book and its publishers and its author, and now, of course, aimed more widely.
Today, British Muslims are still divided on the fatwa.
Nobody needs a fatwa to tell Muslims what Rushdie has done is wrong. We all know what is the punishment in Islamic law.
We were wrong to have called for the book to have been banned. We were wrong to have supported the fatwa. The images it's left behind in the minds of many British people are very negative ones. I would like to think that British Muslims would now respond differently, that if they were faced with the same scenario, they would not call for the book to be banned. Instead, they would seek to contest it on the plane of ideas.
In 2007, Rushdie received a knighthood for services to literature. The news was greeted by protests across the world, and there were renewed calls for his death.
He's not defined now only by the fatwa. He's written books since that people are now beginning once again to talk about him as a writer and his work, and not only about the Rushdie affair as a political phenomenon, which I think he wanted most of all. And about his safety, well, I think he may always be a target for some lunatic somewhere.